Last week, Valve offered us a peek inside the Steam Deck. I had great things to say then, and I mostly stand by them. But over the last week, I've had some time to consult my companion cube and think about all the things that Valve could have done better. And I was surprised to find that my list kept growing. Today we dive into that, uncover some brand new and detailed Steam Deck impressions, as well as answer your questions and more in this Steam Deck News Roundup. What's good, Deck Gang? I hope you all had a nice week. As I said, I've had some time to think about the teardown, and the main thought I kept coming away with is that Valve was in an extremely unique position to give a video that, for various reasons, could be better than one by iFixit or LTT, but instead they gave me one that made me wish it was actually done by someone else. While Valve's video gave me a vague, feel-good sentiment that they're on our side, there were some things that I thought were lacking. In LTT's reaction to the video, for example, they were quick to point out the continuity mistakes. Some commenters on my video brought that up too. There were things like the case was off, and then it wasn't, the battery was connected, and then it wasn't. I kind of shrugged it off like, it's not a big deal and these things happen. Not only that, but what I liked about this video compared to Sony's PS5 teardown is that it was less produced and more instructional. But the question I'm asking myself this week is, was it instructional enough? Continuity mistakes like these undermine the gravity of some of their own warnings. Don't do this while the battery is connected, except that's exactly what they did. Valve is a company with a lot of money and they could have reshot this once they saw their own errors, and they did catch their errors, but they chose not to reshoot it. This is in line with their inconsistent tone in the video. They think it's cool to open things up, but don't want you to do it under any circumstances and even warn you that you could die. I think that it's important to address both sides of the wide spectrum they're targeting, the tinkerers and the non-tinkerers. I just think they could have handled that a bit more elegantly. People should absolutely be made aware that they are taking a risk in opening their Steam Deck. They could damage their device and perhaps even harm themselves. It's true. But this sort of tinkering has benefits too. They say leave it to the professionals, but every single professional became professional by opening up and servicing their devices. There's no way around that. I suppose what I'm saying is, most people know their own tolerance for this sort of stuff. A bunch of you in the comments enjoyed the teardown video but said you're not going to open it, and really there's no reason to. But the people that have a high tolerance for this are going to feel compelled to open it despite not having a reason to. They will find a reason to. When I first got my GPD-1 Max, the shoulder buttons wouldn't work consistently. I waffled a bunch on contacting support. I was worried that it would take weeks for me to get back the device that I had been anticipating for months and that I had only just received. And then I worried that it would come back with some other defect and I'd have to go through the whole process again. So I sucked it up and opened up my $1,000 machine and fixed it myself. With no real instructions, no iFixit video, and I'm not trying to brag. What I'm saying is, no normal person does that. A normal person would sooner return it and get back their money. It's defective, but I'm not normal. I'm a tinkerer. So the people that do need to be warned don't actually need to be warned, and the people that don't need to be warned were never going to heed your warning in the first place. So it's a little odd that the video was so heavy-handed with that message. Another topic that had me vexed is that this was such a great opportunity for Valve to speak to the reasoning behind more of the engineering decisions they made. They told us their joystick assembly was custom, but they didn't tell us why. I think some of us have inferred that they went to such lengths to prevent joystick drift, but it would be great to hear that from them. And what about the modular design with multiple boards? Maybe that's for ease of repair, but again, this was a great time for Valve to tell us why instead of us having to guess. Same deal with the stress test. That video was a bit of a tease. We didn't even get to see what happened to the display after the brick landed on it. And my final complaint here is they didn't go far enough. They might have some plans to do more videos or have others do a more thorough breakdown, so I'll grant them that. But I would love to have seen a complete disassembly. I would have loved a battery replacement. That's one repair that'll be key to the longevity of this machine. They also didn't mention the bridge that I pointed out, and that's going to be crucial for conveniently doing repairs. All of this leads to me feeling more strongly about this just being marketing, which, yeah, of course it is. And I mean, maybe I should just be happy that this is the marketing message that they're choosing to lead with. It's not one that a company would typically choose, but it gives me a taste of what's possible, and I don't want to settle for the bare minimum. What do you think? Am I being too hard on Valve? Is this the complete 180 from my perspective last week? Am I going in circles? Let me know in the comments. If you're liking this video so far, hit the like button. If you're new here, my name is Richard and I bring you Steam Deck news every single Friday and other Steam or Steam Deck related content every Monday. If that sounds good, click subscribe and slap the bell so you don't actually have to remember that schedule. In other news, we're getting some more detailed Steam Deck impressions for more hands-on time with dev kits. Most recently at the time of this writing is Durante's detailed write-up. Durante is someone who is well regarded in the PC gaming scene for helping improve some of our favorite Japanese games when Japanese support for PC was still in its relative infancy. The original PC port of Dark Souls was a bit of a mess by PC standards, but Durante quickly released a mod that unlocked the frame rate, allowed you to set the resolution, and rebind keys. He parlayed that and other such work into founding a porting studio specializing in PC ports. I give you his bio to say, I really respect what he has to say and my ears perk up whenever I hear his name. So it was a treat to see his thoughts after hands-on time with the Steam Deck. Here's what he had to say. He opens up with saying he's not allowed to share impressions of other games, but that he doesn't think anyone would begrudge him for saying he played several hours of Death's Door and Record of Lodoss War with no issues and great performance. Quick time out here to recommend Record of Lodoss War. This game is dope. It's got Symphony of the Night vibes, but a lot more action oriented. Something to put on your radar. Okay, where was I? Right. Next he talks about one of the games his studio worked on, Trails of Cold Steel 4. He says it runs really well with one caveat. This caveat mirrors something that Bennett Foddy said to me in an email last week. I'll get technical here and quote Durante. He says, quote, there's an initial shader compilation frame time instability, but from what I understand, this will be taken care of for the release version by distributing shader pipeline caches via Steam. After that initial issue, and once the pipelines are cached, it works perfectly. 60 FPS at native resolution with PS4 equivalent settings and fast load and map transition times too. End quote. Essentially, it seems that it takes some time for the shaders to compile when you first boot up the game. This prevents it from reaching 60 FPS immediately, but once that's done, it reaches 60 and stays there consistently. The other thing he's pointing out is that there is already a planned fix for this in the works, and it should be ready by the time the deck launches. He then gives bullet points on hardware and software. These are all really good and to the point, so I'm just going to read them verbatim. Regarding hardware, he says, it feels really good and very ergonomic to hold. All the controls are easy to reach. The shoulder and back buttons both feel much better than their Steam controller equivalents. The D-pad felt a bit mushy at first, at least for my preferences. I prefer it more clicky, but in actual use in a demanding 2D game in terms of input, it works really well. And when I tried it again just now, I can't even really understand where my initial impressions came from. The one thing that's actually problematic in this prototype, or more specifically my unit, is the B face button. It's not a problem to reach or press it, which some might think due to its placement on the very edge, but it can get stuck or wedged in somehow occasionally. I think the initial journalist impressions already mentioned this, and I assume it's resolved in final hardware. The screen gets really bright. I had to turn it down to 15% or so on the slider to comfortably play inside in the evening. Note that I generally don't like high brightness screens. Talking about the screen, it seems nice in terms of quality. I've noticed no ghosting, and contrast seems quite decent for LCD. Then, on the software side, he says, the overall software feels great, very suitable for a handheld and easy to navigate. Having two distinct buttons for OS non-game functions to bring up overlays related to hardware on the one hand and Steam on the other is very useful. Proton works amazingly well in all games I've tested. However, this is very clearly still in pre-release form. Important features only added in the first software update I did, for example just having an option to set time zone in UI, and I've also managed to hardlock the entire thing once already. One thing I was particularly interested in is Suspend Resume, since it's technically challenging to get that to work with a massive library of legacy games. So far it worked perfectly in all but one game I tested. In that one game, audio was crackling after Resume. I think that's probably something that can be ironed out. Suspend currently takes 2 to 3 seconds, Resume 15 to 20 in my tests. It's good to hear about the Suspend Resume feature. I think that this is one major feature that we were still waiting to hear impressions on. Some people may feel that a 15 to 20 second resume is lengthy. It's kind of hard to say right now. These days game loads are so quick that I could go from cold boot of a game to resuming my save about as quick if not faster than that. On the other hand, this feature lets you suspend the game no matter where you are. That's not something that's available on any other platform other than Xbox Series S and X. On those consoles, it seems like a quick resume takes about 5 to 10 seconds, so a good deal faster, but this would presumably work on a much larger library of games. In addition to Durante, there was a Polish website that got their hands on a dev kit and gave some impressions. Using Google Translate once again, they give us a few key details. They point out the deck does give enough heat to warm your hands in the winter, and you can hear the hum of the fans. They say the screen is quite bright, and the resolution is sufficient, giving a sharp picture. They mentioned that they had issues resuming a game after putting the Steam Deck in sleep mode. Personally, I've tried this a lot on Windows with my GPD-1 Max, and I get mixed results. Many times it works perfectly, but 1 or 2 games out of 10 will have some issue coming out of sleep mode. Finally, they speak a little about battery life, and their impressions seem counter to the Ali 213 impressions I spoke to in the unboxing video. If I'm reading this correctly, their battery died after about 3 hours of mixed mode use. They played various games and they were navigating Steam's menus throughout. That's a far cry from having 46% battery life left after about 3 hours of AAA gaming. For what it's worth, I think these numbers sound a lot more realistic. One last DevKit tidbit is this alleged Capcom employee giving a brief statement on compatibility of their games with the Steam Deck. They say, based on their testing, about 70% of their games run very well, but the remaining 30% have minor to severe issues, mostly having to do with pre-rendered videos. I'm very curious to know which games those are, what exactly is causing issues with pre-rendered video, and who will end up resolving them. I rather liked my Q&A segment from last week, so I'm going to keep doing those. I have a few good ones here for you today. First, Denderi asks, can a Steam Deck itself be used as a controller? So Valve has an answer for this in their FAQ. They say yes, you can connect your Steam Deck to PC via remote play. This may not be the most ideal way to connect a controller, but it should work well enough. This actually gave people some fun ideas like, what if they went all the way with this idea and allowed dual screens like Wii U and DS? Somewhat related is this tweet where someone pointed out you can do multiplayer on the go even if you don't have other controllers. Your friends can connect to the Steam Deck via Steam Link app on their phones, and there are definitely some games that this would be really cool for. Next up, Knuckles117 asked if the trackpads are clickable. The funny thing about that one is, I just assumed that they were. I assumed they were clickable the whole time because the Steam controller trackpads are clickable. I never thought to question that assumption. So I did a quick check with a dev I know of, and they said, yeah, they have that vibrating tactile feedback, and you can press them down. Awesome. And here's a question from David Venables. He says, the streaming option for Game Pass looks okay, but I'm assuming we won't be able to do PS Now that way. My answer is, I've yet to test this myself, but I've heard Lutris does work well on Linux. It's unofficial, and there are some known issues, but it exists if you want to try PS Now on Linux. I'll be doing a video on playing non-Steam games on Linux, but I want to make sure I test those options thoroughly before I do so. The last question I have is from Jack Wall, who asks, other than the bracket used to repair the Steam Deck, what would be good deck-related uses of a 3D printer? I didn't have any answers for him at the time, but since then I did come up with something. I think a kickstand would be a good one. I'm imagining a stand with maybe a mobile keyboard that you can attach for productivity. That would be cool. What do you all think? Definitely give some 3D printer thoughts in the comments. That does it for this week's episode. If you're new to PC or Linux gaming and haven't checked out my last video where I break down Proton and Linux compatibility, I suggest you give it a look. I think I did a good job of explaining what's happening behind the scenes without getting too dry, and I did all of that through the lens of over 15 interesting games that came out in September. If that sounds interesting, add that to your watch list. And if you made it this far, you are a real one, and you may have heard this before. Like and subscribe, slap the bell to get notified, tell a friend it's a vibe, that gang out. Goodbye.